Because we're a public policy organization, we always like to talk about the policy aspect of any subject that we undertake, and that is, what's the role and the responsibility of various levels of government, for example? What's the role and responsibility of the citizen in solving these issues? Because public policy problems do not solve themselves. It takes a lot of hard work, it takes a lot of effort, and it takes the initiative of people who are passionate about the particular issue. So what we thought we'd do today is ask some people who are very heavily invested in the media industry just to take, I think we're going to ask each of them to take about 5 minutes to tell us what the two most important points, takeaways, that is, they are really thinking about at this point, many of them having sat through the entire conference. We'd really like to hear from you about what it is you think is the most important things that we've been talking about today. What does need to be solved? Is there, for example, a role for government in this issue? Or is this mostly, at least a great percentage, it's a business decision. Most of it is a business decision. So we'd like to hear from all of you. We have with us, starting just to my left, Ray Ring. He's a senior editor for High Country News. He's also my former neighbor, and he has been writing and has been a journalist for years and years, and very well respected in his field. Next to him, Senator Taylor Brown, who is not a senator today. He just said he is a broadcaster, and you will know, if you have not ever seen Taylor Brown, you will know who he is when he steps up to the microphone, because you'll recognize his voice. Sherry Devlin is the editor of the Missoulian. We're very happy to have her. She's held this post for, I think I counted, 4 years, and was formerly city editor for the paper. She's been with the Missoulian for quite some time. And then the person that we've all been waiting to hear for, and that is somebody who is under 25, and that is Allison Meyer. She is, in fact, the editor of the Montana Cayman newspaper, so congratulations to her for holding that post this year. And finally, last but not least, is Mike Dennison, who, again, a noted reporter in Montana. He has been in Montana for at least 28 years, been with the Lee Newspaper State Bureau in Helena since 2005. So we're happy to hear from Mike, too, about, we're going to get some of that sage wisdom from him. So perhaps, Ray, we'll just start with you. We'll go down the line and tell us what we ought to be thinking about and what you're thinking about.
I'm thinking that my biorhythms aren't that great this time of day, and if I yawn during my talk, it's not because I'm not interested in what I'm saying. My two takeaways are probably close to what I brought here, which is the premise of the conference is that there's some good old days that we're in danger of losing, and I don't think the good old days were that good. That's my first premise. And the second premise I have, or takeaway for me, is I'm optimistic about the future, and that could be a personality defect. But I think there's a quote that's been circulating in this financial meltdown. I don't know who's the origin, but a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And disasters turn into opportunities for change, and I think we're going through that now. So it is a disaster for those who are laid off, for readers who are marooned, for the audience that's not being served. But the audience hasn't been served that well in the past, is my belief, and the audience will be served better in the future. So that's my takeaways. I think we all know the deficiencies in news organizations that we work for or that we are subscribed to in one way or another, where we're the audience. We know about low pay, small budgets, profit taking. We know about Montana media outlets having small audiences marooned on a large landscape, very difficult to get a statewide dialogue going. It hasn't been much a part of this conversation, but that's the status quo, and that's been the status quo for a long time. The coverage that I see in Montana that's meaningful, I've been in this business 30 years, worked for weeklies, dailies, and magazines. I've made some web videos, and I'm a blogger. I started in a newsroom in the Denver Post on a typewriter, spiking my carbon copies on desktops, so I've seen the transitions. The journalism I see in this state isn't that hot. It's okay. The daily newspapers provide almost all of it. Broadcasters here, the TV news shows, really aren't doing substantial news coverage. No offense. It's the budget issues. But even in the newspapers, I see very little analysis, very little investigative work, the kind of stuff Dorothy Bradley was asking about. Zero fly-on-the-wall journalism, where you're in that back room where the decision's being made, where you're reporting what the Democratic Party leaders really think of the Democratic governor, or what the discussion is within the Republican Party about what the Republican Party will be in this state, or the politics within agriculture, where Taylor's a part of it. There's a conservative wing there, a liberal wing, and a centrist place that could be there. This stuff just doesn't get discussed in our media, nor is there any meaningful coverage of Montana journalism by journalists. In other words, critiquing what we're doing. One shortage I see is in the act of writing itself. I'm in the writing business. Is there an interface between the University of Montana's writing program, creative writing, and journalism? Is there between the daily newspaper? I'm not sure, but it would be very unusual if there is. The future that I see, the good future, is a transition to, there's also very little statewide journalism. I'm compressing here for time-wise. So I see a statewide journalism operation emerging in this state in the foreseeable future. It will link the audiences statewide, it will serve the elites at first, and it will branch out to serving the general public. It'll be online, but it will have a print component. The model that I see is the magazine that I work for, High Country News. A non-profit, but 40 years old. So we've been doing this nonprofit gig a long time. Most of the time we look like this, twice a month. Circulation now is about 23,000. We've been there for about 5 years. Now we evolved into a magazine. We cover 11 states in the West. We're between 70 and 90% supported by our readers. We used to accept very few ads. Now we limit it to 15% ads, and they're screened for where they're coming from. We are a nonprofit, but we are the for-profit model. We're delivering a product to customers who will pay us for that product, and that's where a lot of meaningful journalism is going to be done in the future. Other people have talked about that here. I see Montana will evolve a product like this focused on statewide news and analysis. That's probably, I'll leave time for others. So.
Thank you very much. It's a treat to be here, and thank you all for staying so participatory this late in the day. This is great. I thought the crowd might be kind of quiet by this time of the day, but I can see you're just getting warmed up, some of you. A couple of things I gotta say. I've got my 2 points, but I want to make a couple of quick observations of the sound bites that I picked up here. And if you haven't been with us all day, and some of you haven't, I wrote them down, and I go back and look at them and go, wow, did somebody really say that? And it really makes you stop and think. That's the best thing about a program like this. It makes you think so much differently than when you came in. But the one of them was that only the media has the power to drive people apart, to damage Montana solidarity. What a responsibility that is for us that want to do exactly the opposite. And then the other one, or one of the other ones, the great one, and this was the question that came out of the audience: how do you get out of the vicious circle of giving people what they want? How indeed? How indeed do you get out of that? Meaning tabloid smut is what her point was. But how indeed do you get out of that? But the best one was the one when my longtime friend and colleague Ron Davis is up here on the podium, and I think you made the comment that we should look at maybe more blue-collar humor on the radio. If you have not been in Butte, Montana with your dial on 550 between 7 in the morning and 9 in the morning, if you say that, because Ron's station is the king of blue-collar humor, and you guys keep it up because they do a great job. But the trick is, how do you find it? How do you access it? How do you know it's there? That's the key. And there's some great work been done by some people in this room. And speaking of how do you find it and how do you access it, I didn't mean that I won't comment on state legislature, although you got some other legislators here besides me, and I'd be happy to comment. I just meant that I've only been a legislator for less than a year, and I've been in broadcast journalism in Montana. Started be my 30th anniversary this coming November. So I've been doing this a long time and owned our business for about 25 years, and roughly half the time that my friend Jerry Black out in the audience has been doing it. So I'm pretty appreciative of him being here as well. And when I talk about things that, how do you know what's going on? One of the things I learned in the legislature, I got to hell and I thought, well, I'll be right in the center of everything that's happening. We'll know all the stuff. You don't know anything. You're in the center of everything that's happening, but you cannot see the real world from there. I think it exists, but you can't see it from there. And I was so grateful for Mike Dennison and Charles Johnson for putting together that Montana Beltway publication. I don't know if you saw the Montana, those of you tuned into the Montana Beltway piece that they put, and I hope Mike talks about it a little bit here, but Mike and I and the journalists and us legislators would sit together hour on end from early in the morning till late at night, all in the same meeting, and then I'd look at my notes and I'd go back and look at Mike's work on the Montana Beltway, and I'm probably going to embarrass him here talking about this, but then I go back and look and see what really happened, because he is a journalist and his perspective was oftentimes a little different than mine, and if it was right on, I felt like, good, I got it. But I just think that there's so many of those things. How do you know about it? If you were out there trying to find out what's going on in Helena, did you know about that particular effort, among others? So that's part of how do you create awareness, and this group has done an awful lot of good in that respect here today. But as we've heard here today, the need is, I think, and this is my perspective, what I'm taking home, the need is to reinvent our business and reinvent which is the information business. First of all, and probably not only to reinvent, but to re-examine what it is that we do, to re-look at what it is that we do, and third, how do we make that sustainable? How do we make that sustainable in a business model? What I tell budding journalists, and I get a few of them that come through once in a while, and I've hired a few of them and had some great success, but as I tell, and there's a few of them here in the room, and I'm thrilled that some of them are here, but what I tell them is that this is a service business. And if you didn't get that out of today's program, we're about serving people. And if you do not have a servant's heart, or if you truly do not relish and enjoy serving others, then you are in the wrong profession. And I'd say the same exact thing about being in the legislature. If you're going to be a citizen legislator and you don't enjoy serving others, you won't last very long. So and when I say service in this business, I'm talking about your audience, your viewers, your listeners. It's not unlike public service, but you truly have to enjoy serving. And people still want information. Let's not lose track of the fact that people still want information, and it still has value to them. We just have to figure out how do we provide that information and provide it in a sustainable way. In other words, so our employers can make a profit. Second thing, I think, in addition to the service aspect, is that we need to focus on who it is we serve. And we've heard several discussions today about the boutique marketing or niche marketing. Who it is we serve and how we serve them. And that's, again, a pretty easy answer. You serve them any way they want you to, because they already know. All you have to do is listen. You've just got to listen to them. Don't try to tell them how you're going to serve them. Just listen. Just listen. Because if we're going to reinvent our business, we have to focus on those who need our services and who share that philosophy. And lastly, speaking of service and local content, as we reinvent what we're doing at our company, and we're reinventing it every week it seems like nowadays, we're looking at doing more local content, more service to those who support us, and working harder. Now this sounds kind of dumb, but you have to do the work. You have to do the work to earn it. And some of our problem in media in Montana, and I think you did a fair assessment of some of the media in Montana, some of it is that we don't have the staff, but some of it is we're not doing the work. It's just easier to just take the press release that I'm sent and rework it and put it on. Or to find out, oh, the demonstration's taking place at 3 o'clock. Good, I can send a reporter at 2:55. He'll be back here by 3:30. It'll be great. Instead of going to be the fly on the wall, as was just mentioned, we're not doing the work. And that's just critical, I think, to our business. So as we meet with each other at our staff, at our little shop. There's only 12 of us and only about 5 or 6 of us that are actively involved in the news side of it. We meet every morning. We sit down not just to identify the stories today. We always tease that we're trying to figure out, well, what's being discussed this morning in the 600 Cafe in Miles City, or what are they talking about this morning in the barber shop in Havre. We're trying to do that, of course, but we're also meeting for another reason. It's to challenge each other and to high-five each other. Great job on that story yesterday. Good job on that tip you picked up yesterday at the electric co-op. Way to go, to give that personal encouragement and to respect each other and encourage each other to excel. You guys have helped me do that today, and I thank you.
All right. Just a couple of quick things, because I know that primarily what we're here for is to have a discussion with all of you. 2 main points that I was gonna make, which build on what you all were just saying. Number one, obviously mainstream media was too slow to change. The survey 10 years ago, absolutely right on. Resistant to change, sometimes for very good reasons, sometimes for bad reasons. You go into newsrooms today, though, and do that same survey, and what you'll hear from reporters, editors, photographers, everybody down the line is change is a constant. Every day, we're changing, modifying, evolving, reassessing. How can we serve people better? How can we serve an increasingly diverse audience in increasingly diverse ways? And how can we stay ahead of that? We fell behind, and we've had a very, very busy few years catching up and trying to get ahead. And that's what you see today in Montana newsrooms, and I would expect newsrooms all across the country. We have to be everywhere, and we have to figure out how to be those places and still be meaningful, public service oriented, enterprise journalism oriented organizations. And that brings me to my second point, which is despite everything that's happened in the last couple of years, I live in a newsroom that is very, very, very passionate about what we do. And every day I am honored to work with those journalists. This week we had a discussion about what kind of newspaper we want to be in the year ahead. And what I heard from everyone there, and anyone who tells you life has not been great in newsrooms for the last few years is lying to you. It has been hard. It has been traumatic. We've had to lay off people. We've had to do things differently. We've had to cut back and cut back and cut back, and everyone has had to do that. But I am still surrounded by people who love what they're doing, who are excited every single day to come to work, who are absolutely committed to our community and to journalism, and to our readers, and to finding the right combination of news products to serve all of those people and all of those responsibilities into the future. And I hear that from readers too. I am very, very heartened every day by what I hear from readers about. We want you to keep on in business. We want you to keep on doing good journalism. We want you to do more good journalism, and we're willing to support you with that. We don't want you to go away. And I also am very optimistic about the future of journalism. And I'm optimistic because of being surrounded by those good journalists and being surrounded by those readers who are very, very committed to us. Two little examples of those readers who make me feel like things are going to be, things are going to be hard, but things are going to work out. One is from a tweet that we got this past week from someone I don't even know their actual name. After about 4 months of not reading the paper in the morning, I subscribed again to the Missoulian today. Hated so much going uninformed. Thank heavens. and then from a handwritten note from somebody who I know is I'm pretty sure is much older than this person. I know who this person is. And part of what she said is, I think people will continue to read newspapers because they find their concerns addressed. They have pride in their city, county, and state, and they see someone they know in the newspaper. This doesn't happen in some of the other forms of the media. I think the Missoulian works at making the community proud of itself at least once a day. And this leads, and then she has a story idea after that. It's like, okay, good. But I mean, people want that. People want a newspaper. And, if we end up being what we know right now is most of our readers right now are reading us online and in print. And they read us for some different reasons in print than they do online, and we have to provide them with different things. And that's true of our younger readers as well as our older readers. But we have to keep being smarter and smarter and prioritizing what we do and emphasizing enterprise journalism, investigative journalism, watchdog journalism, because we know that that's not only our responsibility, but what our readers are looking for from us. So I do feel very optimistic about that.
All right, so I haven't been here most of the day because I'm trying this new thing called going to class. So I don't know what a lot of the discussion has been, but before I came here, I was talking to a few of the members of the Kaiman staff and kind of about what this conference was about. And they're like, oh, there's no media crisis. And I was like, well, you realize you're probably not going to have a job after you graduate. And I think, the point is that we're going into journalism because we don't think that journalism's going away. But it kind of seems like a crisis because it's this really frightening stage of transition. And I think what I see is kind of what needs to happen is just deciding what we're going to do with all this new technology that sort of changed the industry, and decide like what is going to help us keep doing our jobs and what is going to kind of distract us. And I think it's going to be a really long process and a hard process, but I think in the end, journalism will still be there. And at the Kaiman, we're trying to do that. We're trying to come up with a new website without completely abandoning the print format. Students need it because they do the crossword puzzle during class. But I honestly don't see my generation reading print papers. I get most of my news online, and so I think it's kind of hard too to decide at what point you just stop it completely, since there are so many people who still read print and don't want newspapers to go away. Even though I do see in the future, I can't really picture most of my peers, enough of them to sustain this industry and fund it. And so I guess those are what I see as the challenges, and what I hope will be solved, because I would like to have a job when I'm done with school. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. When I came over here, I wasn't terribly discouraged about journalism and being a reporter. And after I've listened to things, even last night and today, I'm still not that discouraged. I think we're in a rough patch, but I don't think there's any need to panic. But I do think that we are in this new soup of competing media. And so when I say we, I'm primarily talking about newspapers. I'm a newspaper reporter, and I'm talking about the print press and public affairs reporting. I do think we need to distinguish ourselves and not diminish our product. I recall what Jim Strauss said about the talking frog. I'd rather keep it talking frog too, but if the talking frog starts boring the hell out of me, I'm going to throw him back in the water. And so I think newspapers and reporters, newspapers in Montana, we've got to do things that people don't do. Also, I thought about what Bonnie Red Elk said. We produce the news that nobody else takes the time to write about. And that's, I think, what we have to do. We can't wait for the anointed authorities or institutions to raise an issue before we write about it. We've got to discover it ourselves. We've got to educate ourselves. We have to raise the voice ourselves. If not us, who's going to do it? Don't let the powers that be set the parameters for the debate. Of course, that takes time. Reporters have to become experts on specific issues identified as important to the community and the state. They got to pursue stories that take more than a day to develop. Do we want to be just chroniclers of day-to-day events? I don't think so. I think that's our strength, is not just to do that. And so I think that might call even for a re-emphasis away from just event-driven coverage all the time. And that doesn't mean that, the forest fire is burning down, or a fire is burning down the forest all around you. You just ignore that. But I do think it means that there are things that you've just got to ignore and not cover because you want to cover something that's more important, that takes more time. And I go back to what David McCumber was talking about. Go for the long ball. Attack stories that offer a potential for change. And he also said, figure out what not to do. I think that is one thing that we really have to do more and more, is figure out when to say no. People call you and say, we've got to go cover this. Every time you give in to the temptation, you can say, okay, I'll just go do this easy layup thing. It takes away from the time that you need to spend on the stories that really distinguish us and make our product worth buying, worth reading. Otherwise, you're just going to get up there and you're just going to be rewriting this stuff all the time that people aren't going to remember. Whenever people talk to me about something, they say, "Hey, Mike, I really like that piece you wrote." It's never just the throwaway piece. It's always the one that took a lot of time. That's what they remember, and that's what that you're going to build your reputation on. And that's what we need to keep doing in Montana, and I think we are doing it. I just think we need to do a little bit more of it. Thanks.
Terrific, thanks very much. And now what we're going to do is take this microphone and put it on your table. And then what I'm going to do is take the other microphone and go throughout the crowd. We're going to start taking some questions. I've got questions here that people have already actually written down. And I'd like to start it off with one, and then I will give this microphone to you. And the question is this: what about the content catch-22? And that is that if free websites use or capture your newspaper content, and then if newspaper staffs keep shrinking, what's the end result? And any of you, or all of you, can choose to answer any or all of these questions. Just keep passing it.
I'll take a slight sidestep. I think website journalism is going to be, a lot of it's going to be utility, so that potholes that need fixing, but also evolving into, in other words, readers, you set it up and the readers drive it. And it has a utility function, which is a lot of the successful websites are basically utilities. Where do I find a good dentist or whatever it is? And readers will drive that much more effectively than citizen journalists will do journalism. So news websites need to set up utility functions that will be driven by readers. And in terms of the content, High Country News does serious in-depth magazine journalism, a 5,000 to 7,000 word piece on the cover of every issue. we don't see that getting stolen by other people. We sell it to other people who pay us to reprint it. A few, but we don't get ripped off the way the dailies do. So I'm not equipped to answer that question.
Just to dovetail on that just a little bit, it's relationship reading, it's relationship marketing, and that's why it works for advertisers as well, because it's not just the news that gets lifted or recopied or reprinted. It's what's your take on that news. They want to know as much as anything, what's your take, as they like what you read or what you say or what you produce on the television at night. What's your take on it? So you've got to, it's your relationship with the audience that matters, so you need to put your spin on it. Yeah, here's the big news, but here's my take on it, and it's building a relationship.
Well, I could speak to just the one piece of that question in terms of protecting your content. We are very aggressive about protecting our content from people just plain stealing it. And several times a week, and I'm sure it happens a lot more than we actually catch people, but when we catch people just plain lifting our stories or photographs out of our website and putting them on theirs, I give them a call or send them a quick email and tell them they're violating our copyright and we're going to sue them if they don't take it off immediately, and they always take it off. But you have to be aggressive about that. And this isn't about collaborating. This is about people just stealing your stuff. And it's wrong. And they didn't pay the money that we paid to have professional journalists doing it. I don't mind if people have a little intro and say you ought to read this story that was in the Missoulian today and here's a link to it. That's great. But yesterday, for example, there was an online site that copied and pasted. It was something relatively simple. I mean, it was a review of the Missoula Symphony. This guy cut and pasted it off of there, took our name off of it, and our reporter's name off of it, took any mention of the Missoulian whatsoever off of it, and copied and pasted the whole review onto his website. And quite a lot of righteous indignation when I told him to take it off, but he took it off. Well, I told him how he could put it on there with the link to us, but we have to protect. There's something good in there about protecting our copyright. Newspapers can't just give everything away. We invest a lot of time and effort in those people and in reporting that news and collecting it. So where we're able, we are very assertive about doing that.
This is actually something I've thought about a lot because my mom always calls me because she Google searches me and tells me where my stories have ended up. And I'm not really sure what the solution is aside from tracking people down, and I guess doing everything you can to have the reporting and the website that people and advertisers will be interested in. But I guess I don't have as much experience as some of these other people, so. Okay.
There's been a little bantering about citizen journalists, and that's not a really new concept, but it seems to me with web possibilities, internet capability, not only for newspapers, but certainly for broadcasters as well. Somebody with a little camcorder and a cell phone can do a story in Hamilton, put it on FireWire to an FTP, and it can show up on the news 3 minutes later. One of the places where I think we've seen a lot of cuts nationally, maybe some in Montana as well, are those gatekeepers, the editors, the producers who are looking at that. Are you concerned about the problem of the factuality of stories that are coming from citizen journalists who somebody said they weren't very good writers and they didn't follow time guidelines, but also the problem of content in there? Where's the balance that we deal with that with the concept of citizen journalists?
I'll just tackle that one. If it's on the internet, it's not true. So, necessarily true. It's not necessarily true. You just have to. about when I started into my career 30 years ago, I didn't really worry about everything that I said was exactly true until I started noticing how much of what those of us in radio always admired and tried to be Paul Harvey, how little of what Paul Harvey said was really factual. How little of it, when you really sourced it down to a story, say from the Rocky Mountain West, from Montana or Wyoming or North Dakota or somewhere you could source it, you find out it wasn't really true. And that's when it really hit me how important it is. You've got to be truthful. And almost, internet, I like internet as a source of leads. It's a source of leads, but I mean, those citizen contributors can contribute anything they want, and it doesn't have to have anything to do with reality.
I think we're a little stunned just because that is an important question and nobody has an answer. But lack of vetting on the internet, whether it's in your comment section where a lot of comments read more like graffiti than comments, how do we deal with those? How do we moderate? And the same questions come up with citizen journalism, the input. I don't have an answer, and I don't know if anyone in the room does. That's something we're going to need to work out. But I think the veracity of a website gets proven over time. You know, that's something you build is credibility in the same way the credibility of every daily newspaper and weekly has been built over decades or more than a century of being right most of the time. And so there'll be a shakeout as people discern in the audience, are these citizen journalists posted on this website credible or not?
Yeah, I don't have much to do with citizen journalists, and not that I wouldn't mind. I mean, the people that I look at as citizen journalists are basically my sources, and they tell me things, and it's my job to go and check them out and maybe develop into stories. I recall one time when the Lee Bureau wrote the story on John Morrison and his affair that kind of brought down his campaign 2 years ago. Afterwards, there was a pretty well-known political site. I was reading that, and there was all these people speculating about here's why the Lee Bureau wrote that story. Every single one of those comments was wrong. And the reason it was wrong is because not one of those people called up Chuck Johnson or me or Jennifer McKee to ask us why we did the story. If they would have, we would have told them how it happened. And not one of them did. So they just speculated, and it was all wrong.
Well, I think the answer is that, yeah, they have value, but don't take that as the truth. I mean, yes, it has value, and if you had a section, if you were using it aggressively on your web presence as your news thing, I think that you just have to say, this is what the unattributed idea that an anonymous person has. It's not necessarily the truth, and I think I said the same thing as Mike. It's a lead, it's an idea for something, but you still got to do the work.
I think Nancy wanted to know from Mike, what was the reason?
Oh, what the reason was. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you meant the original question. He'll never reveal that, I'm sure.
Oh, well. Well, the sort of speculation that was going on was that we did it because John Tester fed us the story, or that we did it because, I forget what the really outlandish ones were, but the reason we did it is because we heard the rumor and we chased it down. And it was true.
And I would ask Mike, why didn't the Lee Bureau volunteer why it did the story? Why let people speculate? If you have a conversation going out there, why not just say, hey, here's how we got the story and here's why we did it? Did you do that?
No, we didn't. You know, that's a very good idea, and that's a very good comment. I mean, and I think it also goes to the question, when you see things online, comments from whomever, at what point do you say, I'm going to go rebut that and say, this is a bunch of BS? And I do fear a little bit kind of being drawn into the quagmire of that sort of stuff. But in that one, I think, was a pretty high-profile story. I think it probably would have behooved us to maybe write something. I guess the thought never really occurred to us to rebut that and say, here's how it came down, and here's why we wrote it. So.
Actually, I do encourage reporters, if they see comments on stories that they've written, that are just either, mostly if they're questioning why did they do something or saying they got something wrong, I encourage them to go on there, sign on as yourself, despite the fact that everyone else is Smiley or whoever all they are. Sign on as yourself and say, I reported this story, and here's why I did it this way, and here's what the factual information is, and here's where I got that information from. And I actually go on sometimes myself and say, you know, this is Sherry Devlin, I'm the editor of the Missoulian, and this is why we did this story, and here's the background there. And I don't engage people in a discussion of whether it was right or wrong. But I do think if you see something out there, the paper should go on, and I mean, we're approving the comments to go on there, so we should go on there ourselves and explain them. But yeah, certainly the comment section is full of stuff that's wild and crazy too, but.
Yeah, I just think it is so important, and I like the fact that Sherry does that and encourages her news operation to do that, because all those years in Spokane, I mean, even pre-internet, it was, if we knew we were doing a story or running a photograph that was going to cause some concern, it's like, well, why don't we explain the same day as we run that why we're doing this, rather than let the conversation start about, oh, you guys just want to sell papers, this is a bunch, this is why you're doing it. And I know it's hard because there's so much more commentary, but I do believe the public wants to be in dialogue with the news media and want to know. And if the vacuum is there and the news media don't want to explain themselves, it'll get filled. And it often gets filled with speculation. But I really just want to defend citizen journalism a little bit, because I would hate for the group to think that, oh, citizen journalism, you need the trained people, and you can't trust anything they do. Because I think it was John Barrows of Montana Newspaper Association or someone else who pointed out it's really not that new. Most little news operations for decades had regular folks, sometimes paid, sometimes not. They were often called stringers, and they'd write in or they'd call in and they'd say, here's what's going on. I often tell the story of growing up and going to see my grandmother in Chinook. And every time I went, she would ask me to write a story for the Chinook Opinion about our visit. Now, that was citizen journalism. I mean, that wasn't professional, I just put it in. And I don't think anybody checked any of the facts, although I did tell the truth all the time. But there are very successful and very credible journalism operations that are run totally by citizens, some of them totally volunteering, because they feel that their neighborhood or their town has not been covered. And it hasn't been. So not all news media can cover every corner of America at all times. So there are groups of people who have gotten together and said, we're going to do a newspaper. These days it's online usually because it's less expensive. And these are folks who are doing incredible work. So I would hate for us to stereotype and say citizen journalism, not a good idea. I think there are great examples of communities where they are covering what's going on, and they are doing better journalism than some of the professionals. So I would defend citizen journalism to the sense of saying we can't stereotype it one way or the other. And if you want to know names of towns, come and see me later.
Yeah, I think that Melody actually talked a little bit about that this morning, that the folks in Shoto are getting a leg up on that and already encouraging people from some of the surrounding small communities to go online and do some of their own journalism. So I remember hearing that today. Okay, we've got 5 more minutes with the people up here, so other questions for them?
This is more towards, we just started talking about the blogging, we started talking about the online, the questions that are thrown there. My biggest concern with the blogging is the damage that is done on a lot of the blogs that we have through newspapers or other media outlets. To print an opinion in the newspaper, they have to give you their name and their address. But to go on the blogs, and I've seen arguments in Butte that have completely blown up because of the meanness, the severity of the arguments, the name calling that happens on the blogs. When do we need to step in and stop this, or when do we start making these people use their names and addresses so there's accountability for their comments instead of damage being done under the veil of secrecy on a blog?
I don't have an answer for this altogether, but the reality of making people use their names and addresses. Well, the way we make them use their name and address in a letter to the editor is we have to see their driver's license, or we call them. And we spend a lot of time verifying that they are who they say they are. And that's virtually impossible to do online. I mean, you can't tell an online person, run down to the paper with your driver's license so we can verify that you are who you are. And people sign up using fake email addresses, so we can't even respond to them by email. So they're having to register, but they're registering with fake names and fake email addresses. So really, it ends up being you'd virtually have to just turn off commenting on stories altogether. I don't disagree, though, that the commenting on stories gets, it feels to me like it just is it's wild, and I'm not sure that it really furthers the public discussion along at all. And I don't delete very many of them. Extreme profanity I throw off, or things that I just think are completely over the bounds of what's acceptable. I could give you a few examples, but they're pretty rare because if you start getting into that other area, well, they're all crazy. They're all kind of crazy. I mean, not the people, the comments. It's just kind of these crazy conversations. And I have discovered, it's kind of in weird roundabout ways, that some of those people who are kind of bitching at each other, they're the same person. And it'll be like logged on as two different people with two different email addresses. But so I don't have a good answer for it, though.
We've been on the web almost 15 years and have searchable archives going back that far, and we've started, dealing with the comments the last couple of years. I'm an advocate for verifying all commenters and forcing them to identify themselves. I'm in the minority in the journalism industry, as you all know, but I'm not alone. There was an editor on the Washington Post tried to force the Post to go that route not long ago. Others believe that we need to treat online comment the same as we've treated letters to the editor, which means verification of the identity. And if you don't want to identify yourself, you don't get to comment on my website. Tough luck. Go get your own website. And you can do that with a phone call, I believe. And people can provide their phone calls. And I think the large majority of commenters are consistent. They're, in effect, citizen journalists, and a lot of them are informed. And that when you allow the graffiti in your comments, and the anger, and the vitriol, the bitterness, the divisiveness, that it undermines your credibility as a website. People just think, these are the people that go to this website. Why should I go to this website? And it also, as we know, undermines community and that middle ground we're trying to reach through our civic mission. So I think the industry will evolve so that more people are policing comments, but we're just sort of beginning that conversation now.
I'd like to say just one comment on that of one of the best journalists in the state, and she's not here, and that's Evelyn Pyburn with the Big Sky Business Journal. I've had that same discussion with her, Ray, and she would say the idea has merit. It doesn't have to have a name on it. It's the idea that matters. You don't have to put a name on it to have the idea matter. But I agree with you that when it's the anonymity that makes it unfair, because then you can be, just like you said, angry and have all the emotion in, and if you're anonymous, it's not a legitimate idea.
Well, I'll make one comment about the comments sections on publications. They're a huge untapped resource for newspapers. And there are software systems out there, and High Countries apparently uses one, or maybe not, but it is a very, very easy thing to get the commenter to register. You kick back an email confirmation. You can get as much information as you'd like. It's a very simple automated program. But what it builds is a database of people who are interested enough in your publication that they take the time to comment. They become a valuable resource. I moderate everything on my site, and I have no problems at all. There's a lot of 12-year-old kids out there who think that they're 35-year-old men, but trying to comment, and you find that out real quick. One question, we're talking about covering the real difficult problems of the city council meetings or the board meetings. And this is for Sherry, one of the city councilmen does a summation of all of the meetings every night. Is there a reason that doesn't get published in the Missoulian? I know that it's a hugely followed listserv in Missoula and the surrounding areas, but I would think that something like that in smaller communities as well could be an easy way to get at least an opinion about what transpired during that city council or those board meetings.
Right. Well, we have a full-time reporter who covers City Hall, and she attends all of the city council meetings. She's also one of the people on his listserv, and she has a blog, MissoulaRedTape.com, that often refers to something that he's had on his listserv and provides a link to people to that listserv. But in terms of publishing his account of a city council meeting, I wouldn't do that, because I don't think that that's our job as a newspaper or a website, because his account of the meeting is, he's a politician and one of the participants in the meeting, and I think our job is to go to that meeting and to report in a fair and balanced way about what happened there. And everything that he reports from the meeting is going to be colored in some way by his own opinions and his own votes that he took at that meeting. But certainly we keep track of what he says, and we've quoted from his accounts in stories before, and we link to his listserv in his accounts all the time. So we don't ignore it, but I think it would be irresponsible to use his reporting of the meeting as as journalism, because it's not journalism. It's his opinion, absolutely. And so we report it as his opinion, right?
Okay, the one last question from Noah, and that doesn't mean that we're going to stop talking. It just means that we're going to excuse the panelists after this, and then it is time for all of you in the room who have not had a chance to say anything to stand up and make a comment. So if you have not yet been heard, this is going to be your chance after this question, and we'll spend about 20 minutes doing that. You can ask a question, you can answer a question, you can make a comment, you can say anything that you need to say, and it's your turn. So one last question, Noah.
First, I just want to thank everyone for coming. As a big news junkie, this is kind of like, for a nerd, this is kind of like seeing a lot of celebrities, and I'm just, this is really great for me. So thank you. I'm a political science and history major, and I read the Spokesman. I go to school in Spokane. I read the Spokesman Review, read the New York Times every day, and I spend about over an hour online. And first, a quick defense of citizen journalism. ProPublica, I don't even know how to pronounce it. It should be Publica, I feel like. This has become big because they can track stimulus spending where they don't have. People can't afford to pay. Organizations can't afford to pay enough reporters to track that stuff, and they're doing. And CNN has teamed up with them. Politico, factcheck.org is teamed up with these groups, and so there's a lot of. That's how journalism started, was citizen journalism. So I don't think we want to knock on that. And also talk about comment posts. People don't pay money to read comment posts. And people don't, and the vast majority of people don't put stock in that as news. That is rumor and it's gossip, and there are always going to be people that will think that's actual fact, but the vast majority of people do not. And I hate to see that. I think what I always love about these conferences, the Wheeler conferences, is that I think we can examine everything that's going on. And I think I don't want this to turn into. There's a lot of journalists, and I'm sure there'll be stories that come out. I don't think this should turn into a congratulatory integrity lap, victory lap, because I think of two major examples of probably the two most respected newspapers in the country. The Washington Post, which recently got in trouble for offering dinners for a certain amount of money to their sponsors. And I mean, we didn't talk about this at all, but this is the, you know, in the New York Times, at the Iraq War, I mean, really missed the boat on that, and they really printed some stuff on the front page that turned out to really have a damaging effect. So I don't think that we should, just make it, we need to recognize some flaws. And I think that we haven't talked about ethics that much. I mean, we kind of stumbled around it, but I think there's a real, I mean, when you have something like the Washington Post like that, when they're offering these dinners, and I'm sure that you can explain it a lot better than I can, but just as someone who's a member of just the public who loves reading news, from what it looked like to me, which I would consider myself just a little, not extremely well informed, but pretty well informed, this looked just terrible for the industry, and when things like this happen, that's why people are losing trust in the media, and that's why they're going to go. If they're going to have to pay to read when they think something's compromised, why are they going to pay for that if they think the news media is compromised? And I'm just wondering your thoughts on that. That was kind of a speech, sorry.
Well, I thought the Post was pretty sleazy there too, with a blind spot in the New York Times. I was very disappointed in. There were some journalists, the McClatchy journalists, were on it. But that schmoozing at high levels, where you're having dinner with the government official off the record, and then you put the government official's party line in the paper the next day. That has a lot of national journalism runs like that, and it's kind of the country club set, and it's one of the things that's wrong with journalism in this country. That's another reason why I don't think the good old days more or less existed.
There's also a line there of you have to have the relationship too. You have to have the sources trust you, and sometimes you have to be a little bit, you have to have a trust relationship there. It doesn't mean you have to have dinner together at high levels, but you've got to at least know each other on sometimes a personal basis in addition to the professional basis. And otherwise you can't call them and get them out of bed at 2 in the morning and say, what's the deal on this? They won't tell you if you haven't had a dinner or two with them where they say, well, here's the truth. Now you got to say it in this way. So you have to say, look, I can't say it in any other way than you're going to tell it to me. There's no such thing as off the record, so either tell me or don't tell me.
So you think that wasn't a bad thing to watch?
No, I said it's a fine line between having a relationship with the newsmaker as a journalist and having no relationship at all, and having between no relationship at all, some relationship that's valuable, and a cozy relationship.
As far as the integrity of journalism, I hope I'm not being naive in thinking that in Montana, I think the integrity of journalism is pretty high, and for a couple of reasons. One, we have one of the strongest open government clause in our state constitution of any state of the nation. So there's a lot of things that are out in the open that aren't out in the open in other states. And also, I worked in Montana most of my life, but I've also worked in Seattle, in Colorado. And both times I went to bigger cities, and I was worried about how good I would do or how well I would do. And I was surprised that I was trained as well as I was by the University of Montana Journalism School. And I think that Montana is well served by that, and that because we have such a good journalism school here, that I think the journalism in Montana really is a cut above a lot of other places of equal size and population density.
Well, some excellent questions, probing questions, honest answers. Thank you very much, panel. We appreciate it. Some of you have come a pretty long way, and some just a short way. So thank you once again. We appreciate it, and we'll have you be seated now, and we'll continue with the program. Thank you. Please join them in thanking you. If you come this way, there are stairs. Well, we're going to continue then, and again, now it's your turn, because I just know there's a few of you out there who are just dying to say something. I know you've got comments. Been listening for a couple of days. It's now your turn to say something or ask a question. Claudia.
I'm Claudia Rapcook from Northwestern Energy and a recovering journalist. You know, I guess the one thought I have of all of this is that the people who should be listening to this just aren't here. So that's point number one. In surveying the room, I'm mostly intrigued by the fact that a great deal of the audience are people like myself. We are the people who you work with to get stories, and there's quite a few of us in the room, and I think it could be an interesting segue later on, maybe at another time, to do a panel discussion about the opinions that those of us that work on a day-to-day basis believe about changes in the media, because there have been quite a few in the last 10 years. I've been with the company for 14 years and doing what I do currently, which is the Director of Corporate Communication for the last 8 or 9. And there's been a lot of changes. And some I can say are for the good, and some are say maybe not so good. And I come at it from a number of different perspectives. I'm a major advertiser in the state. That runs through my department. I have customer care and communications that I'm responsible for, so we do all of the energy efficiency and safety work that you see so much of. In fact, I'm heading up to Kalispell tomorrow for weatherization. I have media responsibilities, although that is not the only thing I do. That is not actually my primary responsibility within the company. And we also publish our own publications for our customers, so in a sense, I'm also a member of the media as well. And I just wanted to say that there have been some changes. I think from my perspective, the things that I think the most about are how do we reach our customer with information that we are required to share with them, energy efficiency, safety, and all of that. And Sarah's group here keeps us on task if we don't meet our numbers in terms of how we communicate with the public. When the public is listening to satellite radio, they're listening to their iPod, they're doing something else, they're maybe checking out the New York Times, and it makes us very difficult to share information with the customers. It also, many of the newspapers in this state and the TV stations in this state, and actually to a lesser extent in South Dakota, are very, I don't really want to use the term schizophrenic, but it's very difficult sometimes to get a answer from the standpoint that editorially they might take a position that, for example, I have been told editorially that they will not run a story that is positive for Northwestern Energy. We're going to have to buy an ad if we want to communicate to customers that rates are going to be 15% lower. You know what? That's all advertising that is recovered in rates. That can get really expensive for our customers if that's the case. So, you know, there are some times when I get very frustrated just by the tug and pull and the back and forth that we go through in terms of not necessarily sharing news. And I will tell you that from an enterprise standpoint, I have seen a dramatic decrease in that. Now, you know, I'm actually kind of okay with that from my perspective, because that's a lot fewer calls that I deal with. But from a public standpoint, I get a lot fewer calls from reporters that just want to find out what's going on. I get very few of them anymore. I used to get a lot that just keep in touch with me. Hey, what's going on? What are things going on? I've got some pretty good ideas, because as a former journalist, I go, God, that'd make a great story if anybody would ever ask me about it. Because for me to call somebody up or pitch somebody, it may not even be necessarily related to what I do. And also, I'm respectful of the fact that many of you have a number of other responsibilities as well and not necessarily want to talk to Claudia. That's okay too. But it is interesting. It has changed quite a bit, and I think some of it has been for the better, and I think some of it could stand to improve. I think from a daily challenge that we have at my company is that we have probably, I think I counted up one time, and this was a few years ago, so it's probably changed, but there are about 180 news organizations that serve our local service territory that we are personally responsible for on a day-to-day basis. I am a PR machine of one. You know, that's hard for me to maintain relationships in 3 states with all of those different outlets, which is fine. But at the same time, it is also, I'm not getting any calls from them. And so that's a challenge too. So we're always there to answer the phone if somebody calls. But I'm happy to say I don't see there as a real crisis. I think it is an evolution, and it's just something that I think we'll all evolve with together.
Yeah, a good idea for a future conference, because you're not the first person who suggested something like that. Could be very interesting. I know that one of the questions that was asked was about public information officers, and these are the people in the state who are tasked with being the liaison between the public and their various government agencies. And one of the questions was, gee, if we see a reduction in the number of journalists or people who are working for newspapers or radio stations, television stations, if we see a reduction, and we think we are, how's that going to affect how I do my work for my agency, and how, again, do we make public policy when we're getting less information, having less contact? Steve, do you want to talk about that at all? Have you seen a reduction, and what's happening with all the public information officers?
I think the public information officer position is fairly stable. There was some talk a couple of years ago, prior to my becoming a PIO, about doing away with PIOs. I think that would be a huge mistake. I think the PIOs serve a pretty critical role. I was hoping to see more PIOs here today. I'm happy to see Mel and Sarah back there, and I think Bob was over there. Yep. So we did get a few people, but as far as what I see in the newsroom, from the Department of Livestock, we deal with a lot of the smaller rural kinds of papers. Some of those papers are fairly static. They manage to hang on to people for a long time. The thing that I think drives me the craziest is trying to keep up with the revolving staffs. I send out a weekly newsletter, and I've probably got at least 2 or 3 changes every week, and it's just impossible to keep track of. I mean, Montana's a good starting place for print and broadcast journalists. They start, they don't get paid a lot, and boom, they're out of here in a year or so. And I think that's probably the most frustrating thing, is to see a good journalist come into Montana, get his feet wet, get his or her feet wet, and then leave in a year.
Hi, my name's Nancy Karizek-Hines. I'm the Communications Director for Billings Public Schools. And it's interesting what you talk about. I think one of the reasons that I'm here is because the demands that we have in our community on information and transparency in public schools is enormous. And so we need to obviously understand from a journalism standpoint how we can best work with you in getting that information out. But we also can't wait for that call to come from you. And so we actually have our own RSS feed now with Billings Public Schools. People can subscribe to that, and that information gets pushed directly out to the parent or the community member. We're about to jump into the whole social media area, so that we're pushing that information directly out to our community, because many times we don't have time to wait. Actually, Jack Copps, our superintendent, was here, left a little bit early. We had a bomb threat at one of our high schools. That happens fairly often in Billings. It's been given the all clear, but we have to stay ahead of that kid who's twittering that parent saying, I'm in a lockdown in my high school because we've had a bomb threat. And so it's really forced us to look at things in a little bit non-traditional way, and to employ all different mechanisms besides traditional media. But our public demands that we become as transparent as possible, and we're accused many times of not being transparent. And so we have to look into every opportunity and employ every opportunity that we have to talk to our community. And so this has been a great discussion, and I'm not officially a PIO, but that's really what I do for public schools in Billings. But it's good to have people from the eastern part of the state, although in Billings we don't think we're part of the eastern part of the state, do we, Taylor? We can still see mountains, so we're good. Thank you.
Was there anyone who wanted to make a comment about what they call sort of a more hyper-local publication? I know that John Murray from the Clarkport Journal had talked about. Oh, Richard. Okay. Okay. All right. No, we're good. If you're good. Okay. Robin.
Okay. Yeah, Robin Ascata from the Wheeler Board, and I just wanted to pick up on the comment that the recovering journalist made that the people who should be listening aren't in this room. And I'm going to be bold and say, because we have a captive audience here of the top media dogs in the state, that collectively in this room we could reach a great portion of the state to let our message be heard so that we're just not talking to ourselves in this room. So I'd like to, turn it back outward again so that the people who need to be hearing the provocative things that we're saying here, that they are reported on from this room and sent out to all the corners of the state. So thanks for being here.
Hi, I'm Judy Smith from here, and I do want to return to your comment because it's still troubling me. So I think we've heard some interesting possibilities, and almost every question or concern that was raised, someone had some possible thing to offer. I didn't hear you get offered anything. And it was just like brushed off too. So I'm just saying, I think I heard it. I'm not going to say that I have a magic answer, but I think that's a challenge that we should all really think about. Because this gentleman's from Alberton, and I know a little bit about Alberton, and so I can imagine that there will be many Albertons in the state. There's many places like this. So rather than saying, well, in 5 years everyone will get on the web, which is what one of the answers was, it's more, I think, important to say, okay, what is an answer for people who believe in informed citizens and all of the rather grandiose things that we were attributing to media, to reach this gentleman's issue? There are people in his community that are not getting basic information that they need. So I would just say, some part of my life was lived in a very different place, and that was what community organizing was about, was that people were denied basic information. And so what happened is a lot of us would get together and organize, and usually it was through an institution, maybe like that woman's school in Billings. But so you'd have to look in Alberton and see where's the institution, but that would be sort of institutional support for a group of people, and that would be a real thing to actually do, is to say a community newsletter or something that builds into a different kind of institution. But I guess that's the concern I have, is while I'm glad the heads of media are in town, or whatever you all are, the point is you're supposed to be not just hitting that, we're supposed to be hitting the folks that live just everywhere in Montana. So let me urge us all to think more seriously about that need. And work together on it. I don't know what else to tell you.
I might just follow up on that, and also Bill Tietz's comment about other areas that are that same way. It's that same way in Daniels County up at Scobie, I can guarantee you. And when their radio station couldn't survive anymore, the community in Daniels County said, well, we've got to have a radio station. And they literally own the station. They have fund drives just like Jerry Lewis, and they raise enough money in one weekend to keep their station on the air for a year. And the same kind of things happen in Plentywood. They've just literally said, well, we got to have information, so we're going to pay for it and build our own way, an out-of-the-box way of thinking. I don't know if that would apply there, but I think you're right. It becomes a community issue that a community has to decide if it's important enough to them.
I'm a musician. I'm supposed to know how to use these things, but we're looking at something that resembles community ownership. Public newspaper where we had something that resembled a board meeting once a year. What are we covering? What would you like to see covered that was not covered? How did you feel the information met your needs? I'm looking at a class through the high school for adult education in community journalism, with the goal of putting forth a newsletter that would go out by direct mail. It's got to get into the people's hands. They need to know if the bus is going to come from St. Regis through to Missoula so they can get to doctors or health appointments or shopping. What time is it going to stop there? There is no other way to get that. It's not published in the papers that I see. There is no radio station. So, I mean, what are the other options? We do publish on the line, and through the Horizons program, we're trying to get that established, a newsletter. and work with other issues. But I'd definitely appreciate any kind of thoughts that would come towards that.
The suggestion is that you look for some innovative ways of handling things. The extension service at Montana State University has occasion to get information out to agricultural units that are rather separated from the main centers of population. And they have found that the newsletter is a very effective system. And what they do is they simply leave a stack in the local bars.
Julie, I have a comment over here. Just this is shifting gears a little bit and looking more at the national level, but I think it is. I mean, Stephen said it earlier, and Taylor repeated it. The power of the media, to divide or bring people together. And I'm not so worried about that in Montana. I think we're a small community, and we have a strong sense of self-identity and a brand and a connection with the common landscape. But at the national level, I do think there's a shift going on that is something new, where, Thomas Friedman, his column on Sunday, and I'm not a big disciple of Thomas Friedman or anything, but it was whatever happened to we, comparing the political climate of this country to Israel's in 1995, right before the assassination of their prime minister. And I go on, if I see Glenn Beck, it's almost surreal. I'm not saying left or right on this. I think there was a lot of attempts to delegitimize the prior president, but I think there is something happening at the national level with the tonality of the discourse that is new, or at least I haven't seen it in my life or since I've been paying attention. So anyway, it's just a comment there. I know we're talking about potential crisis in Montana, but I think there is something there that's happening. So.
Thank you, Julie. Any last comments? Oh, here we go.
Well, my name is Steve Merritt, and I work at the Department of Livestock. I'm the PIO. And earlier I said that one of my frustrations was keeping up with revolving staffs. And that is a frustration, but I also have a bigger frustration. And that's the lack of agricultural news in the state. There are some specialty publications out there, trade publications like Taylor's, that do a really good job of covering ag. But, 1 out of 6 people in Montana is directly employed through agriculture. We don't get any coverage at all unless we're doing something bad. Groundwater contamination, those sorts of things. And ag does a lot of good things for the state. That's always been one of my big frustrations. Here's an example. Yesterday, the Montana Department of Agriculture, right down the hall from me, they recovered $1.2 million from Sustainable Oils for contracts that had been contracted, but the farmer producer didn't get paid. That's a big hunk of money for those folks. A lot of those folks, mostly in northeastern Montana, where those dollars roll over in the community anywhere from 3 to 7 times. That made 2 of the state's daily papers. I guess this is probably not the right forum to talk about content, but that's one of my frustrations is we're an agricultural state, but we don't have any agricultural news, so to speak, in the mainstream media.
Thank you. This is an unusual conference to be tasked with the wrap-up because I must be a citizen journalist in front of you all. There's no question about that. But I do have some observations. And actually, before I give those, so I don't forget, please do not forget to fill out your evaluation. That's very important to us and our continuing work. And then, this is being filmed the entire day, and you can view that on Missoula Community Access Television Series 20,000, Missoula Community Access Television, which serves 20,000 households in the Missoula Valley. And the station appears on Bresnan Cable Channels 7 and 11 in Missoula, Lolo, and Florence. So with that, I will jump into my attempt to summarize what we've talked about. And so this really is an outsider's view looking in There's no question in my mind that we're engaged in extraordinary times. There is, in fact, a cultural revolution going on, and the media at the moment is perhaps at the center of that. And when there's a revolution going on, it's impossible to look at it with any kind of perspective, because you are, in fact, part of it. So in many respects, we're looking at events from within rather than the view of the events from without, so to speak. And in fact, the group here is participating in that change, which makes it even more difficult. But a couple of observations. When the Gutenberg press became popular, when it actually became a device to produce a lot of printed information, most of the great historians at that time said it was the death of knowledge, because you could look everything up. It was written down, so why would anyone need to know anything? I've heard that same thing here today. I don't think that the change in access to knowledge is going to destroy either knowledge or people's aspirations to have that knowledge. And in fact, if we use the Gutenberg press as an example, it increased the aspirations that people had towards knowledge. So perhaps we're just in a phase where, a very positive phase, where in fact more knowledge will be available to everyone, the Google model, so to speak. The other issue that I think is very important, I do not discount this in the least, but this idea of the ideologically based press, television, radio, unquestionably it's a divisive model. But I also go back in history, and it's that same ideological basis of the press, which was the basis for the Federalist Papers, which gave us the Constitution that we have today. So to a certain degree, the ideological press has in the past served us quite well. Now, it took intelligent interpretation of those papers, and it took a majority of the states in the United States to ratify the Constitution based on arguments made in the press. And that certainly is the cornerstone of what you all are about. The other question is the demise of the press, demise of the print. I don't think it's going away by any stretch of the imagination. You might argue, in fact it was, again, when publication of stories became popular, certainly by the turn of the century, and the presses became very inexpensive, we saw the suggestion that the oral history, that the ability to communicate to small groups would disappear. And in fact, we had two extraordinary examples of the inappropriateness of that argument with Chris Peck and David McCumber's presentation. I have no doubt, had I read either one of them, I would not have had the emotional response that I had when they spoke and when they inflicted their tone into the presentation. So that happens in the print media, and it's not going to go away, as numerous people talked about it, whether it's in a boutique form or in a micro form. There's no question in my mind that it's here to stay. Perhaps the things that impress me the most, everybody, I think, would reiterate what Melody Martinson said, that you're here, whether you're a public information officer, a writer, or a web broadcaster, every one of you has a passion for the public's right to know.
And that's perhaps the most important thing. It's an extraordinary characteristic which nobody mentioned today, but the public's right to know is tied uniquely to our Constitution and the freedom of the press. That's an extraordinary condition which we kind of take for granted, and as an outsider looking in, it's the thing that perhaps is most important to me, that regardless of the media, regardless of the way this information is delivered, preservation of the freedom of the press is the single most important thing we always have at stake. And I just can't emphasize that enough. One of the things that I think is important, when we talked about web-based work, is it's clearly evolutionary, but it remains focused on this idea of journalism. And whether it was web-based or print-based, the idea that there is premium content available, and that's all of us, regardless of the media we're in, need to look at what constitutes that premium content so that it can increase the revenues. There's no doubt in my mind, the press, regardless of the model, is going to have to be paid. But it's probably not going to be paid in the way it has been in the past. And so everyone needs to look at models. And I thought both the Great Falls Tribune and then New West demonstrated new models. New West says, we hold conferences. They hold conferences in niche areas related to what they publish. An extraordinary idea. And, in fact, one that perpetuates their own clientele, so to speak. And then the Great Falls Tribune says, well, we held expos because people are interested in those topics. And so these are ways that we have to continue to rethink the revenue sources, and those revenue sources are really important. Actually, here at the last, this whole idea of a Twitter feed. And it was interesting because the idea turns out to be a Twitter feed by a professional journalist. And that makes a lot of sense to me, that people would pay to hear a professional journalist. Now, why would they pay me? Nobody would pay me to hear my Twitter feed except maybe my kids or my wife. But a professional journalist producing that's an extraordinary avenue, perhaps, of revenue. And I'm certain that you all can think of others if you rethink the model under which you're working. I think that perhaps the most important thing, at least the most reiterated thing, which I certainly agree with, is that whether it's in web or print, that people want local news. I'm an old fan of Tip O'Neill's, and Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local politics, whether it's going on in Washington, D.C., in Europe, or in your backyard. And that's really important. Bonnie Red Elk said, there's no crisis of content. You just can't let things go. And she was talking about local content. You can't let things go. And I think that's an incredibly important insight. I think it's also important, we were talking just at the last there about the underrepresented. And in her case, it was the passion of an individual to keep an underrepresented group, a tribal group, informed. And that's really important. As an aside sort of to this, and most of you may know this, but I was astounded. I'm a Columbia graduate. I get their newsletters, and I got the last one, which had the School of Journalism in it, up 44% in the number of applicants to the School of Journalism. Turns out that's true all over the country. Berkeley, up 25%. Now, one of the amazing things is at Columbia, it's up 44%. Columbia costs $70,000 a year to go to school there. And they all realize they're going to graduate and make $12 an hour if they're lucky. Now, why would they do that? They're doing it because what you all represent is perhaps the highest calling in today's culture, that we have a group, a generation of young people who have grown up in communication. And they see that as an extraordinary opportunity in their lives. That's a service activity. Then what I read about, and it gets back to this idea of how do we serve the underserved. Two things. One, those young people are looking for avenues, and so universities, schools of journalism, are actually sending students in to do micro-reporting. Just like you said earlier, no one comes to certain parts of the community unless somebody gets murdered. Well, that's true, and you can't afford to do that. But on the other hand, individuals, perhaps associated with the university, perhaps associated with the Extension Service, can move into those communities and report effectively. The last part of that, everyone said that journalism was a public service. And if it's a public service, then perhaps you even need to rethink the model in which you work to provide that public service to those who are least served. And that's a very high calling and an expensive one, but it's your responsibility if you're engaged in public service. The three things I want you to take away, at least from my perspective. Number one is the potential success of distributed systems. We have gone in this world, every industry, and yours is no exception, has moved from a centralized, high-cost business to a distributed system. And the advantages of the distributed system is you actually can do more with less. It takes collaboration. And as someone said earlier, collaboration is not an easy thing. No one likes to collaborate initially, where you actually share responsibility, you share knowledge. But in the end, it becomes a very effective tool if you want to do more with less. You get increased expertise, you get increase in quality, you do more with less, and you add others to the mix. So for example, maybe there's a role in journalism publication directly for the PIOs. The next one everybody said, but I just want to reiterate it because it's a worldwide phenomena, and that is celebrate the local. We have moved out of a modernist movement which celebrated the universal. And in every form of business, in every form of literature, we all recognize that there is extraordinary value in the local and celebrating that local. We live in a McDonald's world, and basically we've decided that, sure, McDonald's is going to be out there and they're going to sell the universal hamburger. But most people want to be engaged with the local conditions, whether it's the local hamburger seller or your neighbor's dog. What's going on locally? And that's extraordinarily important, and you have to be part of that if you're going to be part of the world as it's evolving. And the last one, which I think is probably the most important, and in some respects it's both the easiest and the hardest thing to do, is that's take responsibility for what you do best. And what you do best is tell stories. Tell stories. You tell stories in a manner, the most difficult manner, but you tell them in a manner that brings people insightful views of the truth. And I say views of the truth because we all know there's no single truth. But can you tell stories? Can you continue to tell stories that bring insightful recognition of the truth? And if you do that, you don't have to worry about the bloggers. You don't have to worry about anyone else. Because what people want, everyone wants, is a view of the truth, a multiple view of the truth, so that they can make their own decisions. And that you've all said is your highest calling, and I would just simply encourage you to engage in that every day. And if you do, you don't have to worry about people like me, the citizen journalist. Thank you very much for a wonderful conference. Peggy, if you're still here, thank you so much for hosting us. And we look forward to your responses, and drive safely. Julie, anything else to add? Anything you send us, we will be putting up on the web. I guess we do a little bit of language checking. But our speakers, we always ask them for their presentations, so that you should be able to read David McCumber and Chris Beck's presentations. And thank you very much for coming. Look forward to seeing you at the next Wheeler Conference.